I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics. Messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for July the 16th, 2025. We have a great deal to go through today, not just with theology and things which were planned before leaving for the Messiah 2025 conference list of topics, but we've also had some significant news events to sort through. Waking up this morning, seeing Israel bombing Damascus. So a lot of questions, a lot of things to sort through from the news cycle. So we're going to get started on our theology roundup. Please be sure to go to the Messianic Apologetics website, messianicapologetics.net. And here you see the FAQs tab and this tab underneath it, Volume 2. These are new frequently asked questions entries we've been working on from 2022 to the present. There's no timetable regarding when we're going to see an actual Volume 2 released. This thing goes in waves. But if you'll scroll down to the letter D, these are all in alphabetical order. And here we have an entry on dispensationalism. You can click there and a PDF file will open on dispensationalism. And right now, because of when we are in human history, issues regarding Israel, rising anti-Semitism, rising anti-Zionism, there are many people out there in the world of theology, particularly on the Reformed side of the spectrum, who are claiming that dispensationalism is a major problem because, like dispensationalism or not, it does affirm some kind of a future reality for the ethnic descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And dispensationalism supports the existence of the state of Israel, and dispensationalists are some of the strongest supporters, again, like it or not, of the Messianic Jewish movement. And when we were up at the Messiah conference recently, there were doubtlessly a few dispensationalists I encountered. So what do we do about dispensationalism? How do we have a good framework for understanding its influence, positive or negative, on Messianic thought? I am not a dispensationalist. That doesn't mean that I disagree with everything dispensationalism has put forward. So that's what we're going to sort through today from this frequently asked questions entry. Can you please elaborate on how dispensational theology has affected the development of the modern Messianic movement? And we actually discussed this previously on Messianic Insider on 18 October 2023. So this is taken from those notes. It's condensed a great deal into a more formal thing you can read, but we are going to go through this. This episode of Messianic Insider has been entitled Dispensationalism and Our Messianic Prophecy Experience, and that's from 18 October 2023. And as I already said, this has been adapted and edited and trimmed a little bit. It should go without saying that right now, and it continues even to this day, given the current crisis in Israel and the conflict with Hamas, sadly it's still present, and with a great deal of attention being focused on the Middle East. That remains true today, July the 16th, 2025, that many people, certainly in the evangelical Christian world, are asking questions about Bible prophecy and the end times. That hasn't changed. Our own Messianic faith community is not immune to some of this either. So, What are some of the things we should be taking into consideration at the present time? Not a huge amount has changed from 2023 to 2025. The issue of dispensationalism has been recently prompted because I recently completed a series of McKee moment shorts after reading through the book The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism by Daniel G. Hummel, released this year, 2023. The subtitle is How the Evangelical Battle Over the End Times Shaped a Nation, and much of it gives an historical overview of the rise of dispensational theology in the 19th century. It reviews the premises of some of the major dispensational publications, ranging from the Scofield Reference Bible to the late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, among others. It discusses the rise of dispensational educational institutions, namely Dallas Theological Seminary, which I have here in my backyard in the DFW Metroplex. And it reviews the dispensational influence on popular culture, particularly with Lindsey, the Left Behind series of fiction books and different movies and different popular media. Now, in the 2010s and 2020s, we have witnessed a considerable decline of dispensational influence, whether dispensationalists want to admit it or not. I highly recommend reading this book if you are in a position of leadership or teaching. This does not mean you have to agree with everything, but you do have to take notice of not just the theological and spiritual, but also the cultural influence of dispensationalism. All of us, if we have been within the sphere of influence of conservative, evangelical, Protestantism, with few exceptions, have been influenced by dispensationalism in some way. Even if many of us, for example, may not believe in an imminent pre-tribulation rapture, it has to be recognized how we are all still affected by some aspects of dispensational culture. We need to acknowledge how today's Messianic Jewish movement, which specifically emerged in the late 1960s and early 1970s, definitely has seen its own development predicated on a great deal of dispensational theology. All of us have been influenced by dispensationalism, not always negatively. Some of the aspects of dispensationalism are actually positive. But we do need to recognize how our approach to the last days, eschatology, and the return of Yeshua, even if we may not believe in an imminent pre-tribulation rapture, which is the main hallmark of dispensationalism, has still been affected by it. We need to be willing to adjust some beliefs, and I think more importantly, overhaul our religious culture when it comes to the effects of dispensationalism. Much of dispensationalism, and this is something I am sure many of you all are aware of, goes back to how someone may approach Paul's word of 2 Timothy 2:15. In the King James Version, this reads as, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." One of the main premises of dispensationalism is making sure that the Holy Scriptures are properly divided, and in particular, that a strong distinction and difference is made between Israel and the church. Dispensationalists make it their theological job to inform you which Bible sections, texts of Holy Scripture, or passages concern Israel, and what other books of the Bible or passages concern the church. There are certain advantages of dispensationalism over covenant theology. Covenant theology promotes supersessionism or replacement theology, the idea that the Christian church has replaced Israel or the ethnic Jewish people, and that God has finished with Israel and is operating through a new Israel or spiritual Israel known as the church. One of the major advantages of dispensationalism is that it advocates that God's promises to the physical descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob remain in effect. It just so happens that right now, because Israel corporately rejected Jesus as Messiah, Israel has been put aside. According to dispensationalists, God is working through a second group of elect or chosen, the Christian church. After the imminent pre-tribulation rapture takes place, then God will once again work with Israel. Dispensationalists support the state of Israel as they believe it has a definite role to play in end-time prophecy. They tend to be very strong Christian Zionists. They tend to be very supportive of the Messianic Jewish movement. They do not believe God is finished with Israel, but they do support an any moment pre-tribulation rapture. And in their reading of Holy Scripture in the most broad sense, the Tanakh or the Old Testament is for Israel or the Jewish people. The Tanakh may be regarded as important biblical history, but it does not apply directly to members of the church for whom the New Testament is pretty much the only applicable scriptures. Dispensationalists have a strong tendency to absolutely believe that the Torah or law of Moses has been abolished and do not consider it to be too applicable to the church. They also tend to pit God's law for Israel against God's grace for the church. One of the major theological criticisms of dispensationalism is that it can seem to promote a works-free, as it were, gospel. This means that not only are people not saved by works, and we obviously do not believe people are saved by works, but how much does God really expect the redeemed in the Messiah to perform good works? A common criticism of dispensationalism is that it promotes a free grace, something without any incumbent responsibility on those in Messiah. Now, this is not intended to be a review of Daniel Hummel's book, although much of what I am going to be discussing does come from me reflecting upon it. What I have read involves some of the points which I think need to be raised when you look at the development of dispensationalism. This goes back to the 19th century and figures like John Nelson Darby, and later C.I. Scofield, E.W. Bullinger, and Louis Sperry Chaffee. These are some of the very early voices who got the idea that God has worked in history through progressive dispensationalism. There are, to be sure, some points of truth raised by dispensationalism. It is stated in Hebrews 1:1 and 2, how God has revealed a progressive plan for the ages steadily to humanity. But is this plan actually to be understood in the context of the age of reason, the age of law, the age of grace / the church age, the millennial age? Or is it to be better understood, as is seen repeatedly throughout the Holy Scriptures and in a great deal of Second Temple Jewish theology, as the present evil age and the age or world to come? One of the most influential resources of dispensational theology, and I did not know this until I read Hummel's book, has, of course, been the Scofield Reference Bible, which I have right here. It's actually on my bookshelf, but the Scofield Reference Bible includes introductions, annotations, different notes. It has actually been the #1, you would never have guessed this, because I certainly did not, selling publication from the famed Oxford University Press. And the Scofield Reference Bible has influenced tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, of Christian people into believing a dispensational theology. It has also been re-released several times with updated annotations made here and there. Of course, someone like me has to have them in his library. Another resource common to dispensationalism is the Companion Bible by E.W. Bullinger. I have not looked at this for quite some time, but Bullinger was somewhat of an extremist when it came to his version of dispensationalism. Generally speaking, dispensationalists believe that the birth of the church started in and around Acts chapters 2 and 3 with the day of Pentecost. E.W. Bullinger actually concluded that the birth of the church started much, much later, namely around the end of the book of Acts, Acts 28:28. While according to customary dispensationalism, presumed Old Testament rites like the seventh-day Sabbath or the festivals were considered to only be for Old Covenant Israel, this ultra-dispensationalism believed that even things like communion or water baptism were not intended for the Christian church. Louis Sperry Chaffee was one of the major people who was behind, among others, systematizing dispensational theology and was also critical in the establishment of Dallas Theological Seminary, right here in our backyard in the DFW Metroplex. Over the years, I have encountered many people who have taken classes at DTS or who have taught at DTS. It is obviously not the only dispensational seminary out there. There are other seminaries and institutions which have had some association with dispensational theology, some actually getting started out as dispensational. Hummel goes into detail regarding Fuller Theological Seminary out in Pasadena, California, and how it started out as dispensational, but now is not. Still, Dallas Theological Seminary is widely regarded as the main hub of dispensational theology, being one of the first places people normally turn to when they want a dispensationally styled education. DTS has a reputation of being highly conservative in terms of its doctrine, certainly more conservative than an Asbury Theological Seminary where I attended. Dispensationalism, and DTS especially, generally has a Calvinistic or Reformed view to soteriology, that is the study of salvation, being seen to promote the idea that God has predestined some to salvation and others to damnation. DTS, as well as many other dispensational institutions, would similarly be seen to promote a doctrine of eternal security, meaning that those who are the elect, those who are saved, cannot ever lose their salvation. So, in a lot of our family's interactions with people from DTS, especially my mother and I, because we come from a Wesleyan Arminian tradition, we have run into some conflicts. Another major theological premise seen in a great deal of, although not exclusively, dispensational theology, certainly from DTS alumni, would be cessationism. It is widely affirmed that the dynamic gifts of the Spirit ceased with the death of the apostles and their immediate successors. Being a continuationist, I believe that the gifts of the Spirit continue. That does not mean that we should not be skeptical sometimes. We'll leave that discussion for another session. But this has been one major challenging area we have had with people within the DTS sphere of influence. I have a number of publications here. We're just going to list them off by name, which have been in my library for quite some time, written at the semi-academic level, largely reflective of the perspectives which have come out of DTS from the 1950s to the 1980s. These are books which have circulated throughout tens of millions of Christian homes and were things which my parents back in the 1980s were influenced by, as well as what extended members of our family were influenced by. You possibly are familiar with some of these, or may even have some of these on your bookshelf. One resource which I read years ago to just get a good feel for a dispensational eschatology is this one, The Nations, Israel, and the Church in Prophecy by John F. Walvoord. Walvoord, who lived from 1910 to 2002, was a major professor at DTS for many years, although he has been deceased now for over 20 years, 2023. He is frequently invoked as being one of the main intellectual voices and scholars behind the doctrine of pre-tribulation rapture. Indeed, our ministry publication, The Dangers of Pre-Tribulationism, now combined with When Will the Messiah Return, cross-examines his 50 main reasons given in support of pre-trib. But this resource by John Wolvert is just one of his many books and should give you a good idea about where he would have stood regarding some of the big picture aspects of the end times. Another major dispensational voice also came out of Dallas Theological Seminary, whose publications would have circulated definitely in the 1970s and 1980s. This is my copy, again, it's on my bookshelf, of the Ryrie Study Bible by Charles R. Ryrie, which has sold several million copies. This is much different from the Scofield Reference Bible or Bullinger's Companion Bible. The Ryrie Study Bible was produced for more modern people and is quite thorough with its introductions and annotations. Flipping through the Ryrie Study Bible should give you a very good idea about what many people in the 1980s evangelicalism I grew up in were expecting regarding the pre-tribulation rapture, modern Israel, and concepts such as a Russian-Arab alliance which was going to attack Israel. Those kind of ideas, most especially the imminent, any-moment pre-tribulation rapture, are definitely seen in things like the Ryrie Study Bible. Now, another resource, again, it's on my shelf here, is the Moody Bible Commentary. Moody Bible Institute is also certainly a school which was influenced by dispensational theology. It has a reputation being very conservative, and many people I knew and grew up with have gone through Moody Bible Institute. From my time at Calvary Christian School in Taylor Mill, Kentucky, to my time out here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex in the 1990s, and even until today. Many people who had certainly attended classes or got a degree through Moody or DTS had a huge amount of influence in the 1950s through the 1980s on what we would regard as more of an academic or intellectual development of dispensationalism. What we are possibly or probably more influenced by, even though I do suspect that many of you have been influenced by a Ryrie Study Bible, and that is not to say we have to disagree with everything in it, were some of the popular versions of dispensationalism which came out in the late 1960s and 1970s. For many people, resources of those like Wolvert, Ryrie, Dwight Pentecost, and other dispensationalists who largely came out of the Dallas Theological Seminary, but not exclusively, were too technical and inaccessible. Many were more likely to be influenced by the book The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, originally released in 1970. My own mother took a Sunday school class through this book in the early 1980s. It was released multiple times, having sold tens of millions of copies. While not necessarily putting any dates on the possible return of the Messiah, this book has now been around for over 55 years, and it has had a huge influence on popular dispensationalism. Later, a figure like Tim LaHaye and his avid promotion of the pre-tribulation rapture came on the scene. Right here, it's actually back there on the shelf, and I have had this now for over 20 years, is my copy of the Tim LaHaye Prophecy Study Bible. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not point out that right in the middle of this Bible, there is a big, giant fold-out tribulation chart. Given the fact that I am a Bible teacher, I have to have this in my resource library. Tim LaHaye, along with Jerry Jenkins, was co-author of the popular fiction series Left Behind. Many millennials grew up reading these books in their church youth groups, being primed to eagerly anticipate the pre-tribulation rapture. Many baby boomers involved in different church studies and prophecy seminars were affected by the views of something like the Pre-Trib Institute. Some of you all may be familiar with the 1970s series of low-budget films, Thief in the Night, and their song, I Wish We'd All Been Ready. I remember having to watch that in 7th grade with my Bible class. I distinctly remember the vans labeled as Unite, United Nations Imperium of Total Emergency. The Thief in the Night, low-budget films contributed to a lot of the rapture culture of the 1970s and 1980s, mainly reading current events into the Holy Scriptures. My own late father even had a copy of the film Thief in the Night. So this is something which affected everyone, and with it a great deal of pre-trib rapture date setting. How were many affected by these things? Many millennials can attest how their parents were obsessed with the end times on various levels. You need to pay attention to what's going on in Israel. See what's going on in Europe. You know, that's the 10-Nation Confederacy, Daniel 7:7, the EEC. See what's happening in the Soviet Union. See what's happening in the Middle East. This was all of the unbridled speculation, soft date setting, and in particular, the anticipation that something big was going to happen at the end of the 20th century, around the year 2000. I have just covered early dispensationalism of the 19th century, Darby, Schofield, Bullinger, Chaffee, and then more the academic dispensationalism of the 1950s through the 1980s, Walvoord, Ryrie, Pentecost, and then popular dispensationalism, Lindsay LaHaye. At the same time, much of dispensationalism was influencing a great deal of evangelicalism. There was also an emerging Messianic Jewish movement in the 1960s and 1970s. And one of the things which early Messianic Judaism needed was Christian allies. It needed not just Christian allies who would pray for Israel and support the Jewish people. It needed more than just those who would be good Christian Zionists and recognize that God was not finished with Israel. Messianic Judaism specifically needed Christian allies with economic resources. And throughout a great deal of the development of the modern Messianic Jewish movement, much of it, although not exclusively, has indeed been funded by dispensational dollars. We know of a few Messianic Jewish pioneers who got near full-ride scholarships to Dallas Theological Seminary. I do not think it was entirely free, but almost free. This involves some of the major Messianic Jewish pioneers like Zola Levitt, who influenced my late father into understanding Jesus and the feasts. When we moved to Dallas the first time in 1994, my mother got remarried, and it was a Zola Levitt tour to Israel which influenced the new couple. Mark and Margaret Huey to enter into the Messianic movement. And of course, where did Zola Levitt get some of his training? DTS. He was definitely a pre-tribulationist. Another major theological voice in the Messianic Jewish sphere of influence. By the way, these are the names mentioned in Hummel's book, The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism, is Arnold Fruchtenbaum. Here is, it's actually on my shelf over there, one of his books, Israelology, The Missing Link in Systematic Theology. Fruchtenbaum is also a dispensationalist. He believes that the Torah of Moses has been abolished, and he is looking for the pre-tribulation rapture. Dispensationalism has had an influence on the development of the modern Messianic movement. I have certainly gleaned valuable things from Fruchtenbaum. We all have. He has got some very good and solid defenses of the messiahship of Yeshua. But you indeed have to know how dispensationalism has had a sizable impact on Messianic thought and culture. The main thing we're having to contend with today in the year 2023, almost 2024, yes, 2025 as well, especially as we contemplate what is happening right now in the Middle East, hasn't changed. which we can definitely classify in the general category of wars and rumors of wars, Matthew 24:6, is to sort through how people are going to talk. People are going to wonder what is going to result from all of this. Whether we have been in evangelicalism, the Messianic movement, or even if we have gone back and forth between these communities, we have been affected by popular dispensationalism or populist dispensationalism and the culture it has helped see emerge through popular media. Hummel's book goes into detail describing how Hal Lindsey's late great Planet Earth went from tens of millions of copies to a media empire involving radio, television, tours to Israel, a show where he would talk about current events and how he believed they would fit into prophecy. Lindsey would do some soft date setting, meaning that while believers could not know the day or the hour, he would claim that this might be the season of the return of Jesus. Of course, many of you are familiar with how in the mid-1990s, the series of Left Behind prophecy novels by Tim LaHaye was released. And they got a huge amount of circulation, not just among believers, but also non-believers. Much of it was focusing the attention of people on how something big, prophetically, was going to happen around the year 2000 and the turn of the millennium. Many indeed thought that Y2K, the computer bug, could be the rapture taking place. And many people in the mid to late 1990s, our family was not immune, got caught up in prophecy predictions around the turn of the millennium. I think it is very difficult today, in 2023, almost 2024, yes, even 2025, for many to break out of the I'm going to read current events into the Holy Scriptures mindset. Many are not as restrained as they ought to be. One resource, which I got a copy of back in 1998, was this book. It's on my shelf over there, The Antichrist in a Cup of Tea by Tim Cohen. It promotes the idea, as is seen on his cover, that Prince Charles of Wales is the Antichrist or Anti-Messiah. And I understand that a new edition of this book is planned to come out in the future because now, of course, he is King Charles III. Charles was not the only person targeted as a possible Antichrist figure, but this kind of culture of reading current events into the scriptures, certainly making soft predictions for the return of the Messiah or for other things, is directly influenced by dispensationalism. Even though it may be seen how many have abandoned the pre-tribulation rapture, the culture of wanting to predict matters and have the proverbial edge still too often persists. Our family specifically remembers the predictions of Monty Judah, who foretold that in mid-March 1997, the abomination of desolation was to take place on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It has been almost 27 years, 2023 now, so almost 29 years, since that false prophecy came and went. This whole culture of reading current events into the Bible, and with it putting out soft dates, or maybe even hard dates, came from a great deal of the popular dispensationalism in the 20th century. Our family has witnessed various persons come out with various predictions, and even stress to treat me as a false prophet if those things don't come to pass. But when their predictions fail, they continue to make more of them. We have to come to a reckoning with all of this, and with the religious culture which tolerates unwarranted end-time speculation. Many sectors of the Messianic community, which understandably focus on matters in Israel and the Middle East, are saturated with a great deal of fear and paranoia. This has affected our overall theology and how the Messianic movement is underdeveloped in too many critical areas. Dispensationalism affects how we look at what is happening in Israel today, and it is going to affect some of the decisions we make. I believe we are living in the last days, and I believe that we are getting closer to Yeshua's return. But I believe we need to do so in a responsible way, which performs critical work for God's kingdom and which heralds the return of the King. One of the things which Hummel goes into detail describing in his book, The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism, is how dispensationalism kind of hit a fallout in the 2000s and into the 2010s. Some of this was the result of dispensationalism having become a big business through people like Hal Lindsey, the Left Behind novels, etc. There were also some very serious theological challenges issued to dispensationalism, such as, why are you compartmentalizing the Bible, the Old Testament and New Testament, Israel, and the church? Do you not know how some major ethical dilemmas have come as a result of Christians not having a firm grounding in the moral principles of the Old Testament? This idea of dispensational free grace has resulted in a huge amount of sin. Approach them as you will, but these are some of the legitimate criticisms of dispensationalism. Dispensationalism has also lost considerable support for other reasons. Many from the millennial generation who grew up in dispensational pre-tribulation rapture environments did not just get a theological package, mainly in conservative America, of reading the Bible as split between Old Testament Israel and the New Testament church, and an any moment rapture. You also got Christian Zionism because you have to support Israel, because Israel has an important role to play in the end times, and God is not finished with Israel. On top of that, you also frequently got a great deal of fundamentalism, very hyper-literal readings of Holy Scripture, which were not open for questioning. You definitely got young earth creationism because some of the early supporters of dispensationalism supported young earth, like Henry Morris of the Creation Research Institute. You also got complementarianism, meaning that men lead the family, with the husband being the sole leader of the family, with the wife abiding by all of his decisions. You even got, along with those matters, that if you are a true born-again Christian, if you are indeed loyal to Jesus, then you will be Republican and you will support the policies of the Republican Party. The main issue you had to be 100% agreed on was, of course, abortion. There can be no abortions with no exceptions at all, perhaps even to save the life of the mother or incidents of rape or incest. Much of this composed the conservative dispensational package many millennials, myself included, were expected to abide by and not question in any way. Well, that package of dispensationalism to divide the Bible between Israel and the church, and any moment pre-tribulation rapture, Christian Zionism and unfeigned support for the state of Israel, young earth creationism, complementarianism, and support for the Republican Party. Guess what? In the 2000s to the 2010s, that was all substantially rejected by millennials. People like myself rejected some of it, retooling our approach in other areas. Many of my peers broke out of this conservative package as a direct consequence of the 2003 Iraq War and a failure to find any weapons of mass destruction. They concluded that the conservative establishment, the Christian establishment, lied to them. I have relatives in my family who had this conservative package deal sold to them as young adults, and now today they would be considered woke, ex-evangelical, and deconstructing. Looking at my own theological development, I am someone who dismissed with dispensationalism quite a long time ago and became a post-tribulationist upon receiving the Lord into my life in September of 1995, almost 30 years ago. I would consider myself a Zionist, as I do support the state of Israel. I absolutely believe it has a biblical right to exist, but I do not believe that we are supposed to support Israel solely on the basis of providing the proverbial fuse for the end times, We are supposed to support Israel because God supports Israel. He has promises to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The nexus of what God is doing on this planet is Israel. And as we stress in the Messianic community, non-Jewish believers are to look at themselves as Ruths, meaning that it is not just about your God will be my God, but where you are buried, I will be buried. Ruth 1:16 and 17. To be sure, though, I have definitely moved beyond a fundamentalist, hyper-literal reading of Holy Scripture. I would still be considered to have a small c conservative reading of Holy Scripture, certainly consistent with evangelicalism, but not necessarily some of the hyper-literal approaches dispensationalism is known for attracting. These may not always come from Dallas Theological Seminary or Moody Bible Institute and others, but can definitely come from those who are dispensational. In contrast to those who espouse a young earth, I believe in an open discussion regarding Genesis 1 through 11, because that is what millennials actually require today. If we do not believe one's approach to early Genesis is a salvation issue, then we should be able to discuss different points of view. The Jewish community, which is overwhelmingly liberal, widely believes that God used evolution to bring about the human race. I myself do not believe in evolution, but we should not make it a matter of division the way those in the dispensational sphere often do. I am definitely not a complementarian, and instead strongly identify as an egalitarian. I believe that at creation, man and woman were equal, and that their equality was lost via the fall. And that via the work of the Messiah on the tree, the equality of men and women has been restored. Restrictive instructions like 1 Timothy 2 have to be understood for what they meant concerning the false teaching in Ephesus Timothy had to clear up. They are not universal for all times and settings. As far as it concerns Republican or GOP politics, I have actually gone back and forth politically over the years. I have been a registered Republican. I have been a registered Democrat, although some of that has been to vote in that particular party's primary. I have never voted Democrat in a major national election or even a major state election. I have voted Republican in both national and state elections, but I have voted in piecemeal at times for Democrats at the very local level. And it has usually been because I know the person and they are old conservative Democrats, an endangered species now. Quite frequently, this conservative package, as one of the major fruits of dispensationalism, and is thoroughly documented by Daniel Hummel, is something rejected by millennials. It is also widely something rejected by Generation Z. Having differing points of view is one of the major generational challenges which affects the Messianic community, every bit as much as affects evangelicalism. There is one major thing which we do have to take into account, especially as we reckon with dispensationalism, and in particular, popular dispensationalism. This involves people not only pushing an imminent pre-trib rapture, but also trying to predict the time of the pre-tribulation rapture, or perhaps even not the pre-tribulation rapture at all, but promoting a religious and spiritual culture of hyper-compartmentalizing the Bible and putting together their own timelines of the last days. These are timelines which almost always fail to deliver the return of the Messiah. All of us have been affected by this, and there is, I think, a period of reckoning soon coming where we are going to have to acknowledge some of the negative influences of dispensationalism, even on contemporary Messianic culture. I do not believe that the answer to dispensationalism means that we have to abandon a premillennial eschatology, meaning the Messiah returns before his 1,000-year reign on earth. I do not believe we have to embrace a postmillennial or amillennial eschatology, which are both rooted in supersessionism or replacement theology, and where the world is going to get better, with it all being Christianized. The Christian church is then going to reign, and it is going to hand over the keys to Jesus. I believe we can still be premillennial, because a premillennialism has the Messiah returning to Jerusalem, he restores Israel, and we see the prophecies of the Tanakh or Old Testament involving a literal return of descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to the Holy Land take place. I do think we're going to have to shift backwards a little bit to more of what would be considered historical premillennialism. Historical premillennialism, before the rise of dispensational premillennialism and the imminent pre-trib rapture, actually advocated that God's people were going to go through difficulty leading up to the return of the Messiah. It held out the hope of a restoration of Jewish people to the Holy Land. Now, it may have had some interpretations of different numbers or days or years, depending on what the passage was in Daniel, Ezekiel, or Revelation. It may have looked at them more as big picture than limited, but those are things which require further study and investigation. But having an orientation which is more historically premillennial will doubtlessly aid us better in the future than dispensationalism has. Indeed, one of the things which I think, more than anything else, is part of the negative legacy of dispensationalism is actually people putting together their pre-packaged end-time charts. Okay, so back with the Tim LaHaye Prophecy Study Bible on my shelf over there. Here I have a chart from the Tim LaHaye Prophecy Study Bible. This is one of the many thousands which have been produced. Many people make it their life's end to actually calculate the year of the Messiah's return, thinking that they can micromanage the end times. Many well-meaning people fail to consider how the prophetic texts of both the Tanakh and apostolic writings are not two-dimensional. They are often three-dimensional or four-dimensional, multi-dimensional. God is trying to communicate some of the most significant aspects of human history in unique language, and it is arrogant of any of us to think that we can micromanage them and compartmentalize them. Look at some of the tribulation charts out there and how the seals, trumpets, and vials or bowls are all laid out and arranged. We think we can figure this all out, when in actuality, we do not know. All we can do is put possibilities out there. If we discuss the end times, then we need to do so with humility and with the recognition that pending new or more information, we may have not gotten it all accurate. One of the things which continues to hit me about much of the whole end time matter is how within Second Temple Judaism, there were specific expectations of what the Messiah was going to do. The Messiah was going to be a political or revolutionary figure, overthrowing the Romans and reestablishing the throne of David. Of course, Yeshua the Messiah came on the scene, and he was executed by the very people he was expected to overthrow. Yet, because of Yeshua's resurrection from the dead, various Messianic prophecy expectations had to be recalibrated and altered, and even needed to be significantly reviewed in many cases. Many Messianic prophecy expectations from the Tanakh did indeed fit Yeshua, but not in the way many were anticipating. So, as it concerns the second coming, how many of us, because of some of the legacy of dispensationalism, in particular, how various ideas have been presented from these prophecy charts, which may not be entirely correct or accurate, are we going to have to review, reevaluate, and change? How many people have you possibly encountered who have made some presumptuous claims about the return of the Messiah, the abomination of desolation, or the rise of the anti-Messiah, Antichrist? How many people have put a chart together, spoken presumptuously, and have let their speculation on the end times get way out of hand? And that is why you see a lot of criticism about dispensationalism today. How many people, even who would not identify as supporters of a pre-trib rapture, the main hallmark of dispensationalism, have still been affected by a dispensational culture, thinking that they can micromanage the end times, figure it all out, put some chart together, and at least make some soft predictions about the return of the Lord, which of course later get proven wrong. And we're seeing a lot of the backlash of that today with the huge rise, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. You think Israel is the center of God's dealings on planet Earth with the last days. No, that's not true. Israel is now the church. We're seeing a lot of this, and let's face it, this won't be the last time we have to sort through some of the matters of dispensationalism. It has affected Messianic thought, and we'll just deal with those aspects in piecemeal as they come. Okay, some of you all did see me take a few notes as I was reading through that FAQ entry. Yes, if you were following the text on the screen, I did notice a few grammatical things which have got to be fixed. Scribal error. We're human, we make mistakes, and we're always reminded of how we can communicate things better through the written word. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup for today. And of course, we're going to continue to address some of these highly important and significant subjects. Now let's move on to our news roundup, because a lot of things, of course, have taken place in the past day or so since we met last. We always do the news roundup after the theology roundup because everything is, of course, time sensitive. All of the links I'm about to go through, you can access these yourself when this episode is archived on MessianicApologetics.net later today. Okay, so there are a lot of hot spots we're going to be discussing, ranging from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, renewed conflict in the Middle East, Israel and Syria now, the whole issue of the Epstein client list, what we're seeing in Washington from the right, from the left, and then just a few other things which are, of course, greatly disturbing. Yeah, pray for the world. Pray that sanity prevails. Okay, we're going to start out with this story from Open Source Intel yesterday, July the 15th. Trump: if Russia and Ukraine can't reach an agreement within 50 days, it will be very bad. We're going to see what happens with Putin. So, okay, what's going to happen with the Russia-Ukraine conflict over the next 50 days? Okay, now we just talked about dispensationalism, so I thought this was kind of interesting. This came across my feed on X, formerly Twitter, from Corey M. Marsh, Christian Husband Seminary professor. We know that John MacArthur recently died, and a lot of people across the theological and ideological spectrum issued words of condolence. He was a great man, a great teacher, a great preacher. Didn't always agree with them. Sometimes, very, very few people actually came out and said, hey, I don't like John MacArthur. We're kind of glad he's gone. Look, we need to pray for the MacArthur family, pray for Grace Community Church. Someone has just passed away. They're in mourning. But here, this is someone who said, To all anti-dispensationalists out there now praising John MacArthur for his impact in teaching ministry, MacArthur was a committed dispensational premillennialist throughout his entire ministry. Try and remember that when you resume to bashing the theology he held so dear. So that's kind of interesting. So some people have used John MacArthur's death to highlight these kinds of cracks in the proverbial system. We do recognize it with John MacArthur's passing. Also, a couple of weeks ago, Jimmy Swaggart's passing, that there is a shift taking place. They represented an era which will no longer be with us. That is a fact. All right, from Newsmax yesterday, 15th of July, this I thought was fascinating. Former co-chair of the Republican National Committee, Laura Trump, so that's Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, has suggested that there will be more coming from the White House in regard to the Jeffrey Epstein case. Okay, so we've seen Donald Trump, Attorney General Bondi, kind of dismiss the Epstein issue. Now we see Laura Trump saying more is going to come out from this. What is the truth? How much of this is politics? How much of this is intrigue? How much of this is a shell game? We just have to watch and wait. From the Epoch Times yesterday, the 15th of July. I use trade for a lot of things, Trump said at the Oval Office during a meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on Monday. But it's great for settling wars. So Trump's tariffs, the threat of penalizing countries which do business with Russia. Is it going to be able to stop this Russia-Ukraine conflict? And of course, the headline, Trump's potential secondary tariffs on Russia would clobber China or India, some of the major trade partners with Russia. Newsmax yesterday, the 15th of July, President Donald Trump said Tuesday Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky should not target Moscow. We're hearing reports that the U.S. government is going to sell arms to NATO countries, which in turn are expected to probably give them to Ukraine. Shouldn't be used to target Moscow, the Russian capital. Back to the Epstein issue. And this is from the New York Post yesterday, July 15th. House Speaker Mike Johnson signaled support Tuesday for releasing government files related to dead pedophile Jeffrey Epstein in an apparent break from President Trump. Now, this is, of course, an issue where you see conflicting points of view from both the right and the left. People say, hey, we need to release the Epstein files. Just let the chips fall where they may. Others, no, they've all been tampered with by the previous Biden administration. You see people on the right say, like Speaker Johnson, hey, let's just release these. You see people on the left who say, let's just release these. You see these conflicting points of view. And ultimately, regardless of any of the other factors, what this highlights is that somebody in these files, whether they've been altered, doctored, or not, is going to be exposed as having committed some really bad things, and people's trust in government, industry, entertainment, and a whole number of fields in society is going to plummet. Who can I trust? Who can I rely on? Who doesn't have a proverbial skeleton in their closet? But with all these conflicting points of view, I urge all of us to stay grounded and let things play out over multiple weeks at the very least. From Visegrad 24, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov dismisses Trump's 50-day ultimatum. 50 days, before that it was 24 hours, then 100 days. We've been through all of this before. Yeah, what is going to happen with the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Again, stay grounded. Let's look at this over the long term. The first casualty in war is always the truth, and the general population is never going to have all of the information about a conflict like this or others. So here we got from the Post-Millennial, July the 15th. This is from yesterday. Breaking. Trump says Attorney General Bondi should release files of credible Epstein information. Okay, so what does this mean? I would say that, these files were made up by Comey, they were made up by Obama, they were made up by Biden. So again, we're hearing conflicting points of view about the Epstein files, the Epstein case. How much is true? How much is not true? How much is accurate? How much is inaccurate? Certainly where there's smoke, there is fire. And, and indeed, the casualty in all of this is people's trust in these magnets of society. All right, some of you all are familiar with what recently occurred on X, formerly Twitter, with Elmo, right, from Sesame Street, his account where apparently he said, kill all Jews. Well, here you see an official apology. On Sunday, Elmo's X account was briefly hacked by an outside party in spite of the security measures in place. We strongly condemn the abhorrent anti-Semitic and racist content, and the account has since been secured. These posts in no way reflect the values of Sesame Workshop or Sesame Street, and no one at the organization was involved. Now, everyone can draw their own opinion, draw their own conclusion. Awesome Jew thinks, why did it take Elmo 2 days to come up with this? And do you believe Elmo was actually hacked? Excuse me. Yeah, why are we seeing some of this take place? Poor Elmo. Mr. Rogers would never have done this. That's my opinion. From Breitbart, yesterday, 15th of July, Trump on Epstein files. These files were made up by Comey. They were made up by Obama. We are Breitbart. What are your thoughts? Regardless of what is true or what is not true, accurate or inaccurate, what comes out about what Jeffrey Epstein did or not do is going to just erode the trust and confidence. Common people, common men and women out there trying to make their way in the world, working hard, raising families, going to church, synagogue, whatever it is, trying to be moral, ethical human beings. It's going to severely erode their trust in these societal institutions, government, industry, entertainment, sports. And, in my case, it's like, we can't rely on these human beings to ultimately provide us with what only God himself can provide us with. But this isn't going to turn out well, regardless of who is speaking truth, who is speaking lies, who is misdirecting on purpose, who's just caught up in some really bad stuff. All right, I thought this was interesting. This is from the New York Post, because we know that there is an impending mayoral election in New York City. Zoran Mamdani is a radical communist leftist. And so here, exclusive, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon and other Wall Street titans were planning to skip a widely anticipated Tuesday meeting with hard left New York mayoral candidate Zoran Mamdani, the Post has learned. Now, we know that meetings between New York economic elites and a mayoral candidate, this can change at a moment's notice. But if this man is elected as mayor of New York City, you can expect to see many businesses not necessarily leave immediately, but they're definitely going to be looking at other locations for a better business climate. The state of Florida, the state of Texas, even, among others. Why would they stay in New York? Why would they keep their headquarters there if some of his plans come to fruition? So in addition to all of the radically left, Antifa, quasi-anti-Semitic to blatantly anti-Semitic questions surrounding him, there's also the economic questions. From open source intel, July the 15th, this is from yesterday evening. President Zelensky, President Biden was not able to end this war. I am confident President Trump can do it. Okay, I hope President Trump can do this as well. This is a conflict which does need to end quickly, honorably, and more and more people in both Ukraine and in Russia should not have to die. From open source intel, Defender. According to the Washington Post, U.S. President Trump is likely to grant Ukraine permission to use its limited stock of the long-range variant of the MGM-140 Army Tactical Missile System, which have a range of over 200 miles and were provided to the Ukrainian Armed Forces beginning in 2024 for their M142 high-mobility artillery rocket systems to strike targets deep inside of Russia. Additionally, President Trump is said to be considering providing Ukraine with a land-based variant of the Tomahawk land attack cruise missile, which has an unclassified range of well over 1,000 miles and would easily allow Ukraine to strike Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other targets extremely deep inside Russia, even as far as the Ural Mountains. Okay, how far is this conflict going to continue? We've just seen, hopefully, what is the end of the Israel-Iran conflict. We're going to get into what's happening with Israel-Syria in just a moment. Russia-Ukraine, we've got to come to an end on this. We really do. All right, so I woke up this morning, actually it's during the middle of the night, to a lot of these news reports about this emerging Israel-Syrian conflict. From open source intel, Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, announced that the IDF will continue to attack al-Shara's forces in Syria. And this has to do with the Druze community in Syria. The Druze are, of course, a religious minority. Generally speaking, the way I understand the Druze religion, they tend to be loyal to whatever country in which they find themselves. So the Druze in Israel would be loyal to Israel, the Druze in Syria, loyal to Syria. That doesn't mean that when a new government comes into power in Syria, mainly one rooted in Islam, you're not going to see some problems. And so here you have the Israeli government coming to the defense of the Druze minority. The Syrian regime must leave the Druze in Sweda, I hope I pronounced that, alone and withdraw its forces. As we have made clear and warned, Israel will not abandon the Druze in Syria and will enforce the disarmament policy we have decided upon. Okay. Now, a few rockets shot at Syrians trying to attack Druze, or a few bombings from the Israeli Air Force, that's one thing. But what we have seen occur, that's something else. Okay, so here's another one. Later in the morning, July the 16th, Defense Minister Israel Katz, the time for warnings is over. Damascus will now feel the consequences. The IDF will strike relentlessly in Sweda until every force that dared to attack the Druze is eliminated or driven out. To our Druze brothers in Israel, the IDF is standing guard over your family in Syria. Prime Minister Netanyahu and I gave our word, and we will keep it with strength. Okay, so this is the justification for these attacks. Now, this is what got everyone going this morning, July the 16th. This is from Open Source Intel Defender, and it was actually on a live news broadcast. Okay. So, strikes by the Israeli Air Force have now totally destroyed the Ministry of Defense and General Staff headquarters in the Syrian capital of Damascus. Okay, and there are a number of clips of this occurring. Some of them include a news anchor who was sitting right in front of this as the bombings took place. Which leads us to this, and this is from My Charisma. July the 16th, Israel strikes Damascus. Are we seeing prophecy begin to unfold? Please, ladies and gentlemen, stay grounded. Let these situations unfold naturally. Yes, it's really dramatic when you see Israel bombing the Syrian Ministry of Defense on live television. but remain grounded. Don't go off and speculate out of bounds. What does the Bible say about Damascus? So this is what Charisma said. Hearing about attacks on Damascus instantly brings to mind the ancient words of the prophet Isaiah. In chapter 17 of his book, Isaiah tells of a time when Damascus will be reduced to ruins, no longer a functioning city, but a desolate heap. That prophecy has fascinated and unsettled students of Scripture for centuries. While Damascus has suffered many wars, including the Syrian Civil War, it has never been completely destroyed in the way Isaiah describes. Okay, so some people, because of what has happened just now in the past day, are they going to see that Isaiah 17 word come to pass? Let things play out naturally, please. All right, so back to the Epstein issue. Here is a post from President Trump on Truth Social. Trump saying that, hey, look, this Epstein stuff has been doctored by the previous administration. And this is what is highlighted here. And it's got a lot of people going. And this is in mainstream media as well. But I am posting this from X to make a point. Their new scam is what we will forever call the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. And my past supporters have bought into this BS. Yes, he said BS. Hook, line, and sinker. So, he says, they haven't learned their lesson and probably never will after being conned by the lunatic left for 8 long years. I have had more success in 6 months than perhaps any president in our country's history, and all these people want to talk about, with strong prodding by the fake news and the success-starved Dems, is the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Let these weaklings continue forward and do the Democrats' work. Don't even think about talking of our incredible and unprecedented success, because I don't want their support anymore. And so this person responding, laugh out loud, I am officially an independent now. Release the Epstein files now. Now, we know Donald Trump is a master at trolling people, but he's basically saying, I don't need people who supported me, who think that there's something to all this Epstein stuff, supporting me anymore. Okay, what's going to come of this? And finally, and here's some more footage from Open Source Intel Defender. The Israel Defense Force has released footage showing strikes earlier by the Air Force against the Ministry of Defense and General Staff headquarters of the Syrian army in the capital of Damascus. The IDF also confirms it carried out strikes near the presidential palace, adding that they continue to monitor developments and the regime's actions against the Druze in southern Syria. Indeed, what's got a lot of people concerned is apparently this new Syrian regime, which took over after Bashar al-Assad left, was open to relations with Israel, perhaps even joining the Abraham Accords. And then this happens. So what we definitely know is that situations, alliances change from day to day. We know we have to stay grounded. We have to let events play out over multiple days, multiple weeks. But we also know the Middle East is a very dangerous place. People are going to, especially if they're keen toward dispensationally styled newspaper eschatology, read messages from current events into the scriptures. At the same time, we have to be responsible and not be ignorant of this either. Because the worst response we can do is say, well, I know there are all these wars and rumors of wars and all this bad stuff, but I'm just going to do Torah. How many people in the Messianic community embrace that approach in response to fear-mongering, false predictions, etc.? We know that regardless of what the actual truth is or not, because we can only read between the lines from a lot of these statements, God is on the throne. Ultimate truth and justice are with Yeshua the Messiah and his coming kingdom. And there are a lot of people who are confused, upset, disappointed, and they're putting their faith and trust in human beings, not in the Lord. So We continue to watch, we continue to wait, and we continue to pray, because that is all we can do. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support toward all of our ministry efforts. You can give online at outreachisrael.net/support. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.